Do you hate Monk?
I don't hate him because he's ill. He's a psychopath. He's damaged. And he was very useful to me as a storyteller, because boy, does he make the story pick up pace when he turns up. And he has this very scary way of just he's almost like the devil in an old medieval story. He kind of emerges from the north. He just emerges on the horizon. You suddenly see this figure riding towards the homestead. And to that extent, it's like a Western. You feel your characters are so isolated that they've got to protect themselves. No one else is going to help them. So when Monk rides into town, it's every man for himself.
Now tell me about your research learning about colonialism in Canada at that time.
That was a real learning curve for me, because like a lot of privileged English white men, I had been raised with a myth about Canada, that Canada was the place where the English behaved well, unlike the Americans. I was taught that we had always behaved very well towards the Indians there and treated them like equals. This was a complete lie, I rapidly discovered. I knew we had reservations there. I didn't know how small the reservations were. And I have this amazing map I discovered in a library, and I got it photocopied. And it's a little railway map from just the period when Harry went. So it shows these funny little, what were called the alphabet lines, where we, without asking the Indian tribes what they called anywhere, we imposed English names. And we did them at mathematical intervals along the railway lines, and we just called them by names we made up alphabetically. So Winter comes after Unity and Vera, and before Yonka and Zumbro, and then the next place begins with A again. So that was a wonderful graphic showing how arrogant we were, just going in and imposing our system. But then I looked on the map and saw these little shaded areas. There were squares all over it, and each square I knew would have contained 4 homesteads. So 4 men would have had this huge area in which to farm. And then the shaded areas, I said to the librarian, what are these? And she said, oh, those are the reservations. And that really brought it home, because I realized the Plains Cree, who were the main tribe in the area where Harry settled around Winter, the Plains Cree had this enormous area in which to live as hunter-gatherers. They used to follow the weather from the north to the south and up again, following the animals, following the berries. They were not farmers. And we just shoved them into these tiny, tiny areas in which we expected them overnight to change their ways and become farmers rather than hunter-gatherers. So of course lots of them starved. Lots of them got ill because of horrible things like us giving them blankets we knew to be infected with smallpox and the like. And then the real horror story to top them all that I didn't know anything about was this practice we had of forcibly taking away their children and putting them into boarding schools, these so-called residential schools.
Do you know the last one only closed in 1994?
I know, horrific. And it was one of these horrible but brilliant accidents that my novel was published just as a Truth and Reconciliation report into the residential schools was published in Canada. And it shows just what a horror story they were. Not just for what happened in the schools, which, as with any boarding school system like that, you think, okay, there's going to be child abuse, blah, blah, blah. It was more, the real horror story was that what we were doing was a kind of genocide. We were willfully depriving these children of the things that made them belong to their tribes. We deprived them of their language, we deprived them of their parents, we deprived them of initiation rites that would help them belong and come of age. We basically made them be Christians, which they weren't prepared to be, and we were preparing them to be servants. So not surprisingly, a lot of them ended up in psychiatric hospitals, or alcoholics, or just dead. They committed suicide. And the thing I would really wanted to explore, amidst all this welter of horror, really, was the question of the two spirits people, which I didn't know much about until I started my research, and I discovered that most North American tribes, with a very few exceptions, I think the Ojibwa and the Chippewa don't do this, but most of them have this belief in a mystical third gender, which I just found so fascinating, and it chimed so well with Harry's story. This idea that, yes, there are men and women biologically, but there are also these two spirits people who kind of inhabit both genders. It's nothing as crude as being a transsexual. It's much more mystical than that, but they believe that they were uniquely equipped to communicate with spirits and to be trained up as shaman. So these lucky children who were identified as two spirits would have special privileges and status within the tribe. And of course what the English did when we came along was to be horrified by these apparently transsexual, transvestite teenagers. And we immediately made them dress as their proper gender. We robbed them of all their status. We cut their hair. We put them into these horrible boarding schools. And I found this amazing pair of photographs, one showing this incredible woman who was clearly of great pride and status in her community. She had beads and feathers, and she's really looking into the camera as if to say, who the hell are you? And alongside it was this tragic photograph of this young man with his hair very badly cut, and he's in an ill-fitting flannel suit with bare feet. And then I realized, oh my God, it's the same person. And I checked with the archive where this picture came from, and it was taken by an English missionary to send back to his church in England to say, send me more money, because look at the good work I'm doing in God's name. And I thought, I have to put this man-woman, I have to put into my book and give her a voice. And I'm now completely obsessed with her. I kind of want to go back to that territory and write more about it. But,
well, that was my next question. Will you continue exploring this history? It seems like it's a very intriguing journey for you.
It is deeply intriguing, and I think I've sort of run dry of Harry's story. I've told all of that, and unfortunately a lot of the characters in the story die, so I can't do a sequel about them. But I'm fascinated by the question of the residential schools. And the English, I'm really passionate to get across that this is an English guild. It's not just a Canadian guild. When that report was published, the journalists back in the UK were very quick to say, oh, isn't this appalling? How ashamed Canada must be. And I was saying to everyone, well, hang on, this is a system that we put in place, that the modern Canada inherited from us. Yes, they took their time closing those schools, but we were the ones who built the schools. So I might well end up writing a historical novel about, let's say, a husband and wife who end up running one of those schools and the pressure upon them, and I don't know. We'll see. It's interesting territory. And I'm amazed it hasn't been written about yet. So,
Patrick, thank you very much for coming in.
It's been a real pleasure.
You can get Patrick's latest book, A Place Called Winter, at all good bookstores.